BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Now, I might be a West Virginian, but I've mentioned here and there that I'm also a New York Giants fan. For some reason that happened. So what I like to do from time to time is just to tune into Mike Francesa, WFAN, just get some New York sports radio, hear what's going on. But he also talks a little bit more about other subjects more frequently now. And I was listening, and the Mike Francesa show, Mike's on, he's talking about JFK, saying that John F. Kennedy was a personal hero of his. And one of the most surprising things that I heard was he views JFK as a hero, but does not want to talk about the Kennedy assassination. That's number one. And the second thing that really kind of got me thinking a little bit more was the comment that the media now only wants to focus on JFK and his messing around with girlfriends. When you hear something like that, then you just begin to think, well, first of all, is that true or false? And then you begin to think, well, how does the media portray JFK? Then you're probably going to be like, well, who gives a flying fuck what the media thinks? Let's talk about the truth. Sometimes we conclude these segments here on BBOR by asking a challenge question at the end. We got to ask it at the beginning today. Just what comes to mind when you think about John F. Kennedy and his presidency? And judgment-free zone, feel free to drop your answer in the comment section. What do you think about with JFK? Absolutely anything is on the table in any direction. So I began to put some thought into that. And I was like, what really would I say is the takeaway from the John F. Kennedy presidency? I don't think that you can ignore the Kennedy assassination material. That is one subject that I've just glanced at as a casual observer. When it comes to a lot of other conspiracy theories, I just want to know what's going on. I want to be in the loop. I want to be more informed about them. But I knew that if I got really pulled into the Kennedy assassination, I would be really, really engrossed in it. I would find myself engulfed in it for an extended period of time. And I'm not necessarily sure the conclusion, because what we see with a lot of theorists is they really cloud your judgment from time to time, and they can be adding in a lot of impractical information. The conspiracy theory skeptic Jonathan Kay goes about this by using terms like going down the rabbit hole, getting stuck in the wormhole, but I don't really like those expressions, but it is a similar concept. I would say that the media has not forgotten about the Kennedy assassination and all of the things surrounding it. And I would also say that the internet has definitely not forgotten about all the abnormalities going on with the Kennedy assassination. And I don't think that's something that we should really downplay. But let's not kid ourselves. The internet is the media. It's just a little bit more of an alternative form. Some other things that come to mind with the Kennedy presidency is I'm reminded of Seymour Hersh. And he wrote a book not about Kennedy, but about Nixon. It's really about, it's The Price of Power, Kissinger in the Nixon White House. Absolutely fascinating. If you're more of an audio person, there is a presentation that he did on C-SPAN Book Notes with Brian Lamb here on YouTube for free. I think it might be called The Dark Side of Kissinger, like the YouTube presentation, but they're talking about his book, Kissinger in the Nixon White House, The Price of Power. And that goes to say some things about Kennedy as well, because you really just see Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon are connected. And some of the words that entered the English language during the Kennedy presidency, nation building, Green Berets, counterinsurgency, as well as going on to say some other things like JFK was involved with the wiretapping of Martin Luther King. And Seymour Hersh brings up a few other points, such as that JFK is he's often looked upon as a hero, but Hersh refers to his presidency as overrated. And I don't necessarily know if that's the strongest criticism. What I think Seymour Hersh is trying to convey by that, I mean, I don't know if it's the most accurate criticism. I don't really think that JFK's presidency is overrated. I think that there's a lot of excitement going on there, for lack of a better term. And yes, there really is excitement, because you have many different things coming together at once. I mean, look at the geopolitical situation of the time. But when you want to talk about why he might believe that certain things would be overrated, one is another theory that The reason why the mafia gets so pulled into the Kennedy assassination is that JFK and RFK wanted to work with the mafia to assassinate Fidel Castro. And I mean, that's somewhat of an alternative theory. I'm only bringing it up because someone else has been talking about it. I don't know if that's 100% truth, but that JFK was going to use the mafia to assassinate Fidel Castro. But what we can say is that the Cuban Missile Crisis is an event that some people might describe as the closest we ever came to global thermonuclear war during the Kennedy presidency. And I was reminded about that one from Jordan Peterson, actually. Back in 2018, I started Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning course. It's on YouTube for free. And he just sort of mentioned that. He's talking about states of being and existence. And one thing that could have drastically altered the states of being and the existence of the planet Earth with global thermonuclear war was to break out. And the point that he brought up was the Cuban Missile Crisis going on during the presidency of JFK. So you see a lot of forces coming together at once. Now, if we want to talk about some other things that come to mind with JFK, I'm reminded a lot of John Stockwell, the former CIA operative that went public. At the time, he was the highest-ranking CIA individual to go public, or by Stockwell's admission, many people actually do, they just don't tell the truth. And some of the things that he brought up about Kennedy is that there are possibilities out there surrounding the way that Kennedy got to the White House, meaning that there are an enormous amount of accusations of voter fraud in the 1960 general election. We're dealing with Kennedy versus Nixon. As we said, though, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon are very well connected, but for a lot of reasons that, I don't know, I guess get overlooked, or maybe they don't come at first thought. But you have Kennedy versus Nixon, right? And John Stockwell brings up the fact that Mayor John Daley of Chicago counted every grave in the city twice. And that's a figurative statement that Stockwell was making. What he's trying to say is that Mayor John Daley was involved with the voter fraud that went on in 1960, even to the point that Richard Nixon was aware of it. But the reason why Nixon didn't try to challenge the accusations in public is Nixon was smart. I mean, this is another kind of misinterpretation and mischaracterization that often goes on with the MSM, is they try to portray Nixon as a dimwit. Some people genuinely think Nixon was a dimwit. Other people think that he was a genius who knew how to manipulate the political system. And the reason why Nixon didn't challenge the accusations of voter fraud, involving people like John Daley, is that he thought that he had a more feasible pathway to the presidency by just waiting and running for election again. He thought that he actually had a chance to get the presidency if he were just to run again in another cycle, and he did just that. Richard Nixon is actually the only president to serve 2 terms as vice president and 2 terms as president, meaning he was elected twice on Eisenhower's ticket as the vice president, and he was elected to the presidency twice. So those 4 victorious elections, but of course he had to resign. You know that story. But one of the reasons why that is Nixon had age on his side. Nixon was also our youngest vice president, coming to office at age 39. But, the accusations of voter fraud against Kennedy, I mean, when I heard that, I was like, well, we're talking about Chicago, we're talking about Illinois. How many electoral votes did Illinois have? And they indeed had 27. And there would have to be a much more, nationwide case of voter fraud in the 1960 election to get Kennedy into power, because I looked up the numbers, and it's like Kennedy won 303 electoral votes and Nixon won 219. So definitely a margin of, there's definitely a margin of victory that is greater than 27 electoral votes that would have come from Illinois. But if there were genuine accusations of voter fraud, of course, Nixon could have done something about that, could have even just gone to the media. But there are countless reasons why he wouldn't do that. As we just sort of said, he thought he had a more, it would be easier for him to get the presidency if he just ran for election in the future. So you really see that this is a very turbulent time for America. We have the entire decade of the 1960s ahead of us when we're dealing with a president like John F. Kennedy. And, some people genuinely view him as a hero. They view him as somebody who got cheated out of life, someone who was betrayed, and someone who actually stood up to some of the darker forces. I mean, if you're going to get into the conspiratorial stuff, the reason why many people say that John F. Kennedy was assassinated is because he was standing up to the deep state. He wouldn't play ball with the things like the military-industrial complex and the shadow government and their connections to the mafia. And that's why Kennedy was assassinated. I know that's a big nutshell version, but a lot of people view that. And some of the things that they cite are things like Operation Northwoods. And, that Kennedy was just like, I'm not going along with something like that. And that he was a president that was so much against the types of typical falling in line with what any sort of deep state military-industrial complex, shadow government, evil empire would have wanted, that he had to have been taken out. So you see that people have a lot to say about Kennedy, and definitely more so than people have to say about somebody like Gerald Ford. When it comes to Gerald Ford, I mean, maybe the Simpsons got it right. He was like, hey, Homer, do you want to come over and eat nachos? I mean, I don't think people really have the same sort of connection to somebody like Ford, or perhaps countless other people in the 19th and 20th centuries who became president. I'm sure you can think of some other examples. But here's a big point, though, when we're going to be dealing with somebody like John F. Kennedy. During Mike Francesa's upload, he also mentioned about how Kennedy was the first Catholic president. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I've heard that before. I forgot about it, to be honest. I mean, these days, just think about someone being a Catholic for president. Right now, it's 2020. We're just like, well, who's going to be next? Are we going to have the first woman, the first gay president? Are we going to be having the first Jewish president? I mean, we've got all these people running right now in 2020. Like, you're still talking about he was the first Catholic president. And it's something that Mike Francesa brought up when he said that his mother said that John F. Kennedy was our first Catholic president, and he was assassinated. I don't really know how to interpret that remark. Maybe you could view it as something such as he was somebody who was different, and different isn't always welcome in terms of the American power structures. Different is not always welcome. Or simply you could say that John F. Kennedy was somebody that rose to power, from the connections of the Kennedy family, but it turned out he wasn't as malleable as people thought that he was. And you see this time and time again, like even Zachary Taylor as a president would be another good example of somebody like that. Where Zachary Taylor comes to power, they thought that he would just be kind of more of a shill, or somebody that was very impressionable and easily manipulated. And that's one of the major alternative theories out there, that Taylor was even assassinated through, what was that, arsenic poisoning or something? Was it arsenic or cyanide? I think it was arsenic poisoning. They're saying that's the real cause of his death. Michael Parenti was the one who was really promoting that one, but, I mean, they even talked about Parenti's thing on the History Channel and about how Zachary Taylor could have been assassinated, and the evidence just doesn't seem to be there to support it, but that one is also up in the air. That depends on who you ask, but it's a very similar narrative. They're just saying that this guy was not being manipulated by outside forces, and he wanted to use his presidency to make definitive change for the country. Still, though, John F. Kennedy is someone who is held in a very high esteem by many people. I would also just like to ask, I would like to ask you, what do you think about the Kennedy assassination? Total judgment-free zone. I mean, if you leave a comment, I would never rip your head off or tell you even that you're wrong or even that I would disagree with you. This is just an open question. What do you think about the Kennedy assassination? What do you think was the primary motivating factor for somebody to be involved? Like, why did they take John F. Kennedy out? Why? What do you think happened? And we talked about this a little bit when we did our upload on David Aronovich, when David Aronovich is a conspiracy theory skeptic. He wrote a book called Voodoo Histories that we were discussing, and he mentioned that was the one conspiracy theory that he was a genuine believer in, that, okay, there has to be something else going on. But of course, Aronovich had a bit of a reversal on that, and that kind of fueled his conspiracy theory skepticism. I would just like to hear what you guys have to say. Now, as you can see, though, we're not really doing kind of like a deep step-by-step about what could have happened with Oswald and how many shots were fired in the grassy knoll and all of those things. I would leave that up to you guys in the comments section, because right now, this upload is really just more about exploring what comes to mind when you think about John F. Kennedy. Do you think that he was a hero? Or do you think more like something like Seymour Hersh said, that he was a horribly overrated president? Or are you more in line with Chris Matthews and saying Jack Kennedy is the elusive hero? It's really just what comes to mind when you think about JFK. Do you believe that the media is focusing in too much on his affairs? Now, somebody told me this in conversation once, and it's just, I don't know 100%, but someone just told me this, that the FBI was very much aware of John F. Kennedy's affairs, to the point where they kept a file on him. He was under surveillance by the FBI because of suspicious activity, what's going on with him and all these women, and they just thought that that could be problematic in the future. But, I don't think that's the reason why the media would want to portray this angle. They're trying to be sexy. You ever heard the expression that sex sells? Well, John F. Kennedy is going to be no exception. And you also just see, though, that the Kennedy family, though, did come from an enormous amount of power. On this channel once, we were discussing the movie Chappaquiddick, which is, of course, about Ted Kennedy as opposed to John Kennedy. And that was a movie that really tried to highlight just how much power is behind the Kennedys. You see this one scene where Ted Kennedy's in this dark room, and he has this kind of light-colored shirt on, and he's wearing his red tie, and then he's just surrounded by people all in black who are making the decisions for him following the incident at Chappaquiddick. But I've said, though, if there's any conspiracy theory out there that could possibly be true, maybe it's that there is some information being suppressed about Chappaquiddick. I would invite anybody to check out our upload here on this channel on BBOR, or the Ian Holm documentary on what really happened at Chappaquiddick with Ted Kennedy. Ian Holm, Holm. The concluding thing that I would say is, I'm even hesitant to bring up this guy's name, but there's an individual named Dr. Webster Tarpley who says something that allowed me to get more into Kennedy. And that is that you can't just view how the world works and leave out a major part of it. You can't start learning about 9/11 and then not also think about the Kennedy assassination. History is part of a continuum. All of these things are connected in the power process. And the reason why I'm hesitant to bring him up is I've given him enough free advertising on this channel. We've talked about some of his theories from time to time, whether it's Karl Marx was a British agent, or some of the things involving the financial connections behind the Empire of Venice. We've given Webster Tarpley enough free advertising. But the whole point is, he's saying you can't look at 9/11 truth and not think about the Kennedy assassination, because it's about the power structures. And to understand your role in the present day, you have to go back at least 700 years and look at how history has evolved and how it has had this type of snowball effect and how it has built up in terms of creating the present day. So, that was something when I was just like, I've never looked into the Kennedy assassination, but I guess I have to learn a little bit more, because the whole point is these things are connected. Everything in life is interlocking. One idea is going to be connected to another idea, and so on and so forth. But our big questions today, what do you think about John Kennedy? Just what comes to mind? How do you view President JFK? And what do you think about the Kennedy assassination? I would love to hear anything that you have to say at all in the comment section below. If you like this upload, you can hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you're welcome to do so. But most importantly, drop some comments below so we can continue the discussion. That's all for me now. Until next time.